Hello, Eve. Hello.
Yes.
I'm on broadcast right now.
How
Oh,
many
it's Eve.
people do you have?
Actually, broadcast is on now. We have 5 people.
Yeah.
11 people. It's broadcasting right now. You can start.
Okay. So greetings to everybody who is listening in. And you're very welcome to our webinar on spiritual and existential well-being in terminal illness. And we have 2 presenters. We have Dr. Sekajaya Kaya Hills, who is a traditional healer. And we have Mr. Lawrence Matovu, who is a philosopher and theologian, and he provides spiritual and psychosocial care at Hospice Africa, Uganda. So I'll start off by inviting Mr. Lawrence Matovu. Mr. Lawrence Matovu, you're very welcome to deliver your presentation.
Can you hear me?
Yes, personally, I can hear you. And I'll request the audience kindly to write up their questions in the Q&A panel.
Okay. I will begin by recognizing the African Palliative Care Association with its leadership for organizing this webinar, and the invitation to be one of the facilitators of the assembly or this virtual gathering. There might be a number of protocols present in today's webinar, but all are observed. I will begin by saying that I do not have monopoly of wisdom, and what I do is to share my thoughts with you and the suggestions which may not necessarily be true, but they constitute my opinion on the subject at hand, and that's what I intend to do. And on this subject at hand, which I do not claim expertise, or I will speak to the presentation as we have it entitled Spiritual and Existential Healing in Terminal Illness. And from that, we will interact more. I've been introduced. I am Matov Lawrence. I provide spiritual and social support to patients attending Hospice Africa, Uganda. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yes. When I was asked to talk about spiritual and religious things, I thought about the topic. The first statement that came into my mind was, can you go back to the slide? Eve, can you go back to the slide, which is, yes, this is the first statement I thought of, that every understanding of spiritual things is secular and religious is ultimate. I meant in that statement that by the term secular, or by the term saying that every understanding of spiritual things is secular, I meant that it moves between a mystical a priori, and it discovers a based on the mysteries which we can't see. And our spiritual setting within, it enters into the circle with a concrete commitment, and alienation. By saying the understandings ultimate, the religious is ultimate, I meant that it makes them a primary abstract, which translates or which makes a translation of the great commandment, whereby those who are reading the Bible, you can understand the great commandment that the Lord, our God, the Lord is one, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. So the subject of spirituality here is what concerns us ultimately. That's why I thought of that statement. Every understanding of spiritual things is secular and the religious is ultimate. Next slide, please. Yes. In this being ultimate, we will say that man would not be spiritual without thought. And then what could be our expectation in this? We have a citation from a religious philosopher called Rodolphe Otto, who said that man, it is agreed that he is a religious being, and all human beings have a capacity for religious experiences. And what do we have here in Africa? We have the same man called Mbiti. This African philosopher said that man is notoriously religious, and all religious reality begins with what biblical religion or what biblical religions call the fear of God. This comes when our existence between birth and death becomes incomprehensible. We can't understand, we can't predict, we can't position our being, but we know that we are. So this is well cited in the Holy Book. Those are our brothers and sisters who are Muslims in the Holy Quran, chapter 4, verses 131, where it says the response of man in his creation is fear. And remember, fear impairs our judgment to reason. Now, man responds in fear and then turns everything ultimate to the God whom we cannot expose, whom we cannot understand, and exhaustively put in mind. So in his study, we get another philosopher called Eliade. In his philosophy, as he was viewing on religious terms, he constantly reminds us of the fundamental religiosity of man. So the fundamental experience of human existence in this, it says that man suffers from the inability to answer his existential problems, of being able to achieve complete self-fulfillment on his own. So there's something that moves him. There's something that is not seen, but that something is there, and that man cannot fully address what really that thing is. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yes, man, it is agreed that he is a religious man, as we said, being unable to position himself. He constantly questions to which, and sorry, I beg you go back to the slide. I beg you go back to the slide that has been on the screen. Hello, Eve. I beg you go back to the slide which has been on the screen. Yes. Another one, again, yes, that one. And next, apart from this, but next another slide that follows this. This is the way, that's where I've been. Wow, it seems you have lost some presentation there, but it's okay. We can move on and understand ourselves that we are discussing the existential suffering and the spiritual well-being. What could be critical in our presentation today? Our critique should be is that man, if Dr. Eve, you are taking me speedy, I'm almost I am lost. I beg you to take me back where I've been. Dr. Eve, okay, let me share my screen with you here. I will govern it. I don't know whether you can follow. I request to switch on mine here. There might be a technical problem there. Okay. Yes. I said that man, it is agreed that he's a religious being, and all human beings have the capacity of religious experiences, as we cite that from Rodolphe Otto, an African philosopher. And we have said that all religious reality begins with what biblical religions, or what biblical religion calls the fear of God, as we have been talked about, as it is cited from the Holy Quran, chapter 4, as the concept of man, the response of man is the domain of fear. And then in history of religion, we see philosophers like Eliade constantly reminds us of the fundamental religiosity of man, where he says the fundamental experience of human existence is that man suffers from the inability to answer his existential problem. Man can't answer of being able to achieve complete self-fulfillment of his own or on his own. So what could be expected in all this is that man is a question to which there is no answer, as the theologian Karl Rahner puts it forth, that because himself being unaware of, or man being a question of himself, is that because himself is the questioner or is the questioner, he questions himself, who I am, and he can't trace up that. So while struggling to understand his experience or his existence, man soon discover that in the entire creation is unique. He's unwilling to be controlled by creation, and he tries his best to rise above nature. All of us, we understand that everything we try to boost up, we try to show our presence. So the awareness of man of self-insufficiency makes him transcend himself and allows himself to be led by something which is not him or which is beyond him. That's something which is of a higher power. We can term it, or we can term him as God, or something that is supernatural, that is beyond the known. So he comes to encounter ultimate options, either to opt for himself and the world, or to open himself to that which is beyond everything, and therefore to establish for himself a hope for future fulfillment, which gives meaning to his present life and makes him courageously say yes to the pains of human existence or to the pains of the world. And you persevere through faith and total submission to the Creator. So what is critical in this presentation today is that man, to achieve his own fulfillment, he continues to live hence through transcendency, which is within him. Man transcends himself, and this makes him aware of his finitude or his finite. So the Bible and the Holy Quran are very keen here. They cite that in Holy Quran chapter 3, verses 102, it is well noted that you who believe fear God, and he ought to be feared, and do not die except as believers. Everything can be done, but those who believes, there is something beyond that is exceptional and there is extraordinary. Those who believe in the transcendental power, that biblically we see this man that comes from nothing or from non-being. Can something come from nothing? That is the question we can think of. Can something come from nothing? Or can nothing cause something? That is a question we can think of. So now, how can man come to the awareness of his existence when the scripture is very keen and very critical and says that man was made from nothing? What is that nothing? So this is because of the courage ground of being obedient. Man turns to be obedient, and then the domain of obedience turns him to understand that he's completely nothing. Those who are aware of this are called believers in the domain of faith, and those who do not aware of this, who can't understand that they came from nothing and they are nothing in the world, theologians they term them as anonymous theists. Indeed, this is a quotation from the Holy Quran, chapter 16, verses 128, where the prophet writes and says that God is with those who fear him and those who do good. That is a citation from the Holy Quran. So all we are on the thread, and we are on the threshold of death and birth. So this is the fundamental ground of our being. Non-believers are those who deny themselves. Those are non-believers. If you deny yourself, if you deny the transcendental powers, you deny to exist. So if you are denying this, it means you are denying your existence, because finitude in man has no end. It continues until you perfect yourself in the hands of God. Our hearts are restless until they rest in thee. That was the sign, the quotation from St. Augustine, that we continue to seek for more. We continue to look for the higher good. So self-transcendence plays an integral role in healing and in dignified acceptance to the end of life. Therefore, self-transcendence is necessary if, one, a human being is to accept his humility. If you accept your humility, if you accept yourself to be humble, an acceptance of the self implicitly is an acceptance of transcendence, which we name as God. So, of course, one does not need to undergo prolonged suffering to reach self-transcendence, no. So there is that concept of humility whereby it is an embolism of love, the virtue of humility. So point two, self-transcendence is necessary if a human being draws a shift in focus from self to others. That is the domain of palliation, a focus from self to others. This shift is from selfishness and egoism, to start thinking of the other, to start evaluating the life of others as important as yours. And three, self-transcendency is necessary if a human being draws a shift in values. These are our cultural norms. These are our behavior. These are our norms of the society. These are our religious beliefs. So those who no longer find themselves driven by extrinsic motivation or external rewards and demands, but by intrinsic motivation, the reward for an activity is the activity itself. If you want to be rewarded and the reward you expect is beyond what you think or what you do, the reward, just understand, it could be of the other form, but the activity itself, what you do, if you want self-transcendence, if you want to transcend your humanity to God, and then the acts and the doings, what you perform, the daily tasks are beyond what is expected, it tells us we have an insufficiency of our well-being as spiritual beings, as men and women of goodwill. And if I term man, I include the woman. So what could be the cause and the common causes of illness in all this? Because we understand, we all have the real knowledge on what we call the knowledge of God, but what could be the causes of illness? Because we understand even the social values. So one point I pointed out was that the mythological reflections, we have to reflect on this myth. It is a myth from Buganda or Baganda tribe, especially that of the Baganda. It says they term God as Guru. You understand that, my fellow Baganda, you know this. And they term man as Chintu. And still, they term the woman, Eve, Kawa, as Nambi. And what happened during this story? I'll paraphrase it. So the Baganda tradition, or the concept of Baganda, to understand the originality and the beginning of man, they position and they have a thought that man was directly sent from heaven, from Guru, or from God, who is termed as Guru, and received a helper, as we can cite in the book of Genesis, as Adam received the helper Eve from the rib. And also the Baganda, there is a connection where they believe that Nandi was received from Chintu. And then these two, they started a family where all of us where we belong. As you hear, they term themselves as we are Bazukuru Nambi and Chintu, that we are the grandsons and daughters of Chintu or Anandi Nambi. So these two, they got a son, they got two sons. The evil one called the Walumbe or Lucifer, and another one called the Kayikuzi, who is the savior when we turn it to our religious concept. So, and these two, you understand what happened after they wanted to shift from where their homeland to another land. So they escaped when the evil son Walumbe had gone somewhere for other social things which I can't understand. I can't go in a detailed manner. But they determined that we should take this chance to leave the son who is evil, who is what, who is everything, and then we continue to live our life. What happened here? This statement, I don't know whether it is true or it will be an apocryphal, but I will not care. No matter the less, I will use it. They normally say, some thinkers, that every problem in the world begins with the woman. Women in this forum, you will forgive me, but I just want to use it. Nambi forget the millet, and she had to go back to collect her millet. She found the son Walumbe is back. And then Walumbe said, I have to go with you. You have been leaving me here. Then Walumbe went, and nevertheless, the world never had peace. Now this was the real problem, the real trouble started with confusion. Nambi got confused. She forgot the millet. She forgot the millet back, and then she had to return. And then what came later? Suffering and hard work, sweat, and eventual death came about due to, number one, was carelessness. At times there are moments when we are careless with our lives, and stupidity. She had an option of finding something else. These are my thoughts. And three, adamancy, refusing to listen and to cooperate with God. So we can understand all this, that man doesn't want to cooperate with God for redemption since the beginning of the world. So all that can be the cause of illness are related with that mythology. I have paraphrased it. I don't know if I've been so clear, but that is the idea. Now, what could be the understanding of our illness here compared to the traditional existential way of our living? So Western culture, all cultures, the way they identify the cause of illness is completely different with ours. To them, they understand the cause of illness as a physiological insult due to degeneration, infection, or other specific physical causative agents. That's how the Westerners understand the cause of illness. But to us Africans, our cultures understand health not only as the absence of disease, but also as the imbalance between the individual, the community, the environment, and the spiritual world. So illness is caused by imbalance of these systems. What could be the role out of all this? What is the role the ancestors play, whereby they say, here there is what we call the imbalance of the environment, the imbalance of the spiritual world, the imbalance of the individual himself or the community. Now they have all this, as to why to us Africans, we say that no matter the ancestors have passed, but every member, even if you are living or still you are yet to come of a family, you are considered as a sacred and will after death become one of the ancestors. I will be an ancestor, I will be an ancestor one time. So the ancestral spirits, to us, we believe that there is a responsibility of protecting and disciplining their descendants. We believe that the ancestors, they look after us, they look after the family, they give people guidance, they bring them luck and look after different spheres of life. So death is not seen as the end to us here, is just seen as the physical separation with the deceased and joining the ancestral world. And when there is something man is hustling up with, we just understand that there must be an imbalance of these points as we have talked about them. So what is expected? So illness in African sense often seen as God is, it is often seen as God's will, acceptance of God's will is often used as a coping strategy. So those who see their illness in this light often believe that God is in full control of the outcome of the situation. Though spirituality is a strong domain used to help support acceptance of a diagnosis. So religious coping is a distinct entity within the framework of spirituality. So this concept refers to how patients use their religious beliefs to understand and adopt with life stressors. I mean religious coping. That how a patient use the belief systems to understand and adopt with the new situations in life. So to God, we can understand, this is a summary, a quotation I did. I said, the God who created you without you will not save you without you. So all of us, we need to put in more effort. So man can, and man from eternity does not want to cooperate with for eternity. There is no need. Well, all of us, we are here. We have different domains of faith and where we gather for worship. And who doesn't understand why the Bible says? Who doesn't understand that this is wrong? Who does not understand that if I do something wrong to the neighbor, I'm doing something that is damaging his or her own life? So all of us, we know, but due to our adamancy and we just fail to comply with what is expected of us, we continue doing things and they later on, they reciprocate and turn to be a spiritual problem. So we have all these, the principles of space and time. They explain well how man came into a reality. So
you have 2 more minutes.
Excuse me?
You have 2 more minutes.
I have 2 more minutes. Yes. Thank you. Principles of space and time. They say man by his nature longs to be saved by his finitude for the existential transcendence towards the infinite. This is well cited from the Catechism of the Catholic Church, number 74. So every step man takes forward is a step for backward. The existence of the ground affirms that man about his existence takes a look at, let's take a look on the following 5 principles of space and time. We have creation. In creation, we say God created you before he created you, as it is well cited in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 1, verses 5. And in the book of Psalms, chapter 44, verses 10, we see that the psalmist is telling us, be still and know that I am the creator. So God created us, no matter whether we accept it or not. Those who believe. So existence is the next principle. If you want to exist, you must eat things which come from you. So you have to remain attached from the soil where the scripture tells us that that's where we came from, as we read in the book of Genesis, chapter 3, verses 19. So with existence, you have to survive. So survival, you have to stay attached to the soil where you came from. As again, we continue to read in the book of Genesis. So death, it follows. When things die, they go back to the source, as Ecclesiastes say in chapter 12, and the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the life breath returns to God who gave it. So the last one is the life after, hereafter. Each one of us dies a sinner, and we present ourselves to God for perfection. Nobody dies as a saint, as we read in the Psalm 14. So our human response, what would be the human response in this? The central belief is that man is love. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. A kind act obtains salvation, the love of God, due to man's creation in the full image of God. This unites him together with the general community. So lack of self-love and self-resulting self-rejection impede our loving, because what we cannot accept in ourselves, we invariably reject in others. So in those many other ways, what divides us from ourselves also separates us from God and others. So I pointed out the tools. I don't know whether time will be able, I will be out of time. I don't know, timekeeper. I don't know, I request an extra of like 5 minutes and I summarize. Right?
Lawrence, 5 minutes is too much. We have another presentation from Dr. Sekaja, and we plan to have a question and answer session.
Okay.
So just try to wrap up kindly. Thank you.
Okay. So what could be the outcomes in this? So we are saying that it's worrying, therefore, that some forms of spirituality have become suspicious of psychology, that the introspections it generates fearing that it will turn us into too much in ourselves, making ourselves centered rather than other-centered. So a holistic spirituality, including a traditional forms, recognizes the equal importance and the complementarity of self-appropriation and self-transcendence as I talk to them. So the dynamics of palliation is to move beyond the self-concern and to reach out to the higher power, who is God, and the others through compassion and care. So self-transformation, as I've not explained, but as we can understand that it is the gift of self to God, or higher power, is the hunger of our being human. So who should provide this spiritual support or care? This is not a domain of spiritual leaders or clergy or chaplain or whoever, but all designated professionals should do this. All members of the health team should share the responsibility of identifying the spiritual concerns of a patient. So there could be barriers to a failure to do this. One is the marginalization and valuing of psychosocial and spiritual care during medical training. It could be not trained well, but there is a point there. So lack of safe and supportive environment in which to discuss issues of loss and death. So time demands and busy clinical schedules limits our discussions as health providers to discuss issues of loss and grief. So lack of training and skills regarding existential issues are significant barriers. And above all, last and not the least, lack of training in spiritual assessment and care has also been identified by nurses as a strong barrier to provide spiritual care to patients. Over to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Lawrence. That was a wonderful presentation. We had so much to learn in terms of philosophy and how it links into spiritual care. I now want to welcome our second speaker, Dr. Yahaya Sekaja, who is a spiritual healer and is also the director of Prometra Uganda. You're very welcome, Dr. Yahaya Sekaja.
Thank you very much, all of those listening. I am Dr. Sekaja. Initially, I can explain a bit. I'm a dental surgeon by training. I'm a traditional healer, which I say by calling. and I'm a public health specialist. I work with Prometra Uganda, which promotes traditional medicine and traditional healthcare systems. One time I went to a traditional spiritualist to learn. And what happened was that he touched my head, as you see there, for about 30 minutes. And he told me the training was over. What I want to stress here is that there are many ways of coming, of ability to know, many ways of knowing, many ways we come to know. And this brings me to the next point, where disease is explained, yes, from a biomedical or biological perspective. And also disease can be explained from a spiritual or cultural perspective. And in this presentation, I'm bringing the cultural perspective. Within this presentation, I'm just giving my experience on what I have. I'm sharing my experience on what has been happening. Disease being explained, whether biological, medical, spiritual, or cultural, it wouldn't matter much to the patient who is undergoing greater pain. How you explain disease and suffering might not be as important as relieving the suffering. In this perspective, the topic relates to terminal illness, which personally I might not properly understand. I feel it is not a right word to use in this perspective, and you allow me to explain slightly, because for us, in a cultural perspective, what you refer to as terminal illness is a life transition process. We know we are physical and spiritual being when we are still living. And then later we transform and become purely spiritual. We lose attachment to the physical body. And this transformation process from physical to purely spiritual could be short or prolonged. It could be painful or not. And it could be a source of learning and information or not. For example, if you have an accident and you die immediately, that is a short, non-painful transition process. The body is just left and you go spiritual. When you develop diseases like cancer and other diseases, the life transition process is prolonged and painful. Now, from a cultural perspective, that gives us an opportunity to prepare, to reconcile, to reflect. And in that way, we learn more and help ourselves prepare more than a person who just died from an accident. So that prolonged, painful process is not taken to be purely negative. Within the definition of spirituality, I want just to highlight aspects of transcendency, relationship, family, community, and nature, and also express that spirituality is expressed through beliefs, values, traditions, and practices. Now, for me, in here, spirituality, I'm not looking at the religious perspective of man. Spirituality is not equivalent to being religious. Many people are spiritual, but not necessarily religious. When we look at symptoms related to spirituality and the human soul, from a cultural perspective, we believe emotional problems, relationship problems, anxiety, stress and depression, feeling empty or loss of purpose, sense of purpose or self-worth are all taken to be symptoms of human soul and spirituality. Currently, it is being widely known that stress and depression are the world's source of ill health globally. Now, our approaches to terminal illness, using that word in the heading, though I would say our approaches, our cultural approaches to a life transition process is through, within the cultural perspective, cultural healing intends to relieve pains and symptoms related to pains of the biological body, which is this physical body we have. So in our cultural perspective, we look at how best we can relieve that pain, the biological pain. But also we want to restore peace and relationships with relatives, friends and in-laws, which we say, abooluganda abakona ab'emikwano. We also want to restore peace and relationship with nature, which we refer to mainly as social healing. We address the patient's inner personalities using cultural approach, which looks at the psychic part of healing. We also look at restoring full personal identity of the individual, where the individual is, we are looking at the non-physical or non-biological aspect of the individual and putting patient at peace with themselves. And this way of putting patients at peace with themselves is more to address their fears. Our cultural practices are based on the background beliefs that we are connected in various ways. We are connected to different peoples, we are connected to nature, we are connected to animals, we are connected to stones, we are connected, we are connected, we are connected. And within that reality, spirit is a prime element. Within that background belief, we know the dead communicate to the living. And in that perspective, the dead have a role towards the living. So communication to the living and the channels of communication to the living should be kept open. And we do those through rituals. I will let you know later. So there is a greater transpersonal source of meaning for individual, family, communities, and other aspects. Now, when we are looking at diagnosis of a patient within a prolonged life transition process, we look for physical biological pains. We also look for spiritual soul pains. We look, those are expressed through distress, anxieties, fears, angers, conflicts. We get patients conflicting within themselves a lot. We look for elements of feeling helpless and lonely. We look for connectivities or loss of connectivities with the nature, cultural values, and sacred issues. We look for whether the person has the life purpose, the life meaning, whether he has reconciliations he feels or she feels that should be done. We look for what are the hopes, sources of hopes the patient has. All of these, I want to stress one point from a scientific point of view. The spiritual pains are those are expressed as stress hormones and are due to high levels of cortisol. So we shall look at that as we go by. Now, from a cultural perspective, we use rituals to address the spiritual pains of the soul and the spirit. So we know these rituals we can use fire, we can use communal meals, ritual, when we are together. This togetherness, the communal aspects of rituals, we know they engage and gather the attentions of the individual who is suffering, the attention of the family members, the spiritual entities, the deities, nature, and God. So when we are in a ritual, we know the individuals are there, families are there, ancestral spirits are a part of the very different deities, nature, and God. We are there in that communal ritual. So we attune the patient and others to the intentions of these rituals, because these rituals, we use them to recall, to remind, to reflect. And these rituals, we use them to come to terms with our fellow individuals within the communities, to come to terms with us, our ancestral spirits, with our deities, and to come to terms with God and nature. And if we had any perspectives or reconciliations to make, accepting reality, we feel that during these rituals, everybody, all of these concerned are engaged, the individuals, the family, ancestral spirit, deities, and nature. So what we need to know is that people in the life transition process that is long and painful, we must look out for their strength, inner peace, and hope. And we use cultural approaches to go into and look for those spiritual, their strength, inner peace, and hope. We use communal activities to achieve that. One of the approaches is communal activities, where we do communal rituals, communal meals, fire, and those rituals are characterized by symbolism and different energy forms that are experienced by the patients themselves or the people participating. Those communal activities and rituals do not necessarily imply that the patient must be there, but when we are making communal meals, we contribute, and even the patient can contribute wherever they are. to the extent that when the communal activity is taking place, we let the patient know whether he's hospitalized and he joins the process at another level. Within the cultural approaches, we look for connectivity, relationship with relatives, friends, communities, ancestors, deities, God, nature, and biodiversity are really connectivity is reestablished. We use rituals to reestablish connectivity and relationship. We also use cultural approaches to communicate channels with higher beings, the transcendences. If somebody was not dreaming properly, we do rituals to establish those communication through dreams and their interpretations. And the feeling that one is listened to or is listening to the inner unsaid voices. We feel even patients, they have inner voices that are unsaid, but are important within their life. And the listening to those inner voices becomes experience. It becomes very important. We use cultural approaches to strengthen ourselves, the patient's inner peace, and access hope through feeling that they are being forgiven, or even for them to give those to forgive the people in their communities, their ancestors, deities. If there was any unsettled issue, communal rituals help us to reach that forgiving and feeling forgiven. You cannot underestimate the power, the relief of feeling forgiven if you had a conflict and you are suffering. When you feel forgiven, you really feel good. The aspect of feeling being listened to and being loved by the community, ancestors, deities, nature, and God, rituals help us to achieve that. Rituals help us to also help patients to find their own voices, to find their own path, to find their own connections, to find their own satisfactions, happiness, motivations, convictions. We don't need to tell them about those connectivities, their satisfactions and all that, but we help them find them through our communal rituals. So the implications for cultural approaches to healthcare and the outcomes, the patient feeling reconciled, the person who is terminally ill, as you put it, but for me, who is in a transition, prolonged and painful transition process, feeling reconciled relieves soul pain, and subsequently it releases physical pains. Reestablishing and strengthening social functional relationships ends up improving the well-being and even reducing the biological pains. Strengthening, having hope, and coping with illness are aspects that are implied with the cultural approach to health and outcomes. I have a traditional forest. I have a forest where I take my patients. A short walk 3 or 4 times a week under specific trees that we have come to put together. We have planted these trees objectively to connect them to within their different energy levels. But a patient walks through that forest, relates with the trees, and they improve dramatically. Their mental health dramatically improves. I don't know how it works. A patient tells you, I am relieved. I cannot explain how he has come to be relieved, but I believe I don't even need to know how he has come to be relieved to be able to explain. Provided he feels relieved, that's so. Though now science has come to show that actually moving along within the forest decreases the level of cortisol, which is a stress hormone, and subsequently improves the mood, attention span, psychological stress recovery, lowers anxiety, it boosts immune system, because when you are moving through the forest, you breathe in the phytoncins. And these are chemicals the plants emit to protect themselves against germs and insects. That's why you see the plants are not easily attacked too much by insects and germs, because they produce those chemicals. Once you breathe those chemicals in, they have issues on your levels of cortisol, a stress hormone. And once those are reduced, you find relief. So we have cultural tools we use in health management. Those are tools we use, and they have different management roles in healthcare. And towards the end, I actually advocate that we all join together to advocate for cultural health beliefs and practices and spirituality to be understood and contextualized in palliative health care within the national healthcare systems. Thank you very much for your attention. I hand back to you, Madam.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sekaja. That was an excellent presentation. So now I'll open up the floor for questions. We have two panelists. We have Dr. Yahya Sekaja and then Mr. Lawrence Mato. Do we have any questions? I'll read the question. So we had a response from Lawrence. Now I would like to hear from you, Dr. Sekaja. Where is the question? Dr. Sekaja, how would you assess for spiritual distress in children? Kindly unmute yourself, Dr. Sekaja. Thank you.
I can now talk.
Yes, thank you.
You are saying, how do I assess?
For spiritual distress in children.
In children. Now, from a cultural perspective, that's not very easy to assess stress in children. But we are able to assess stress not only for children, but also for people who cannot talk, through facial expressions, through the feeling of energy forms. When I'm personally gifted, I can put it that if I'm near a patient, I'm able to feel their energy levels. And when the energy levels are below a certain level, I am able to assess or to have a feeling about their stress levels. But it is not easy, it is not uniform, and I cannot say all people have the ability that I'm gifted to have. But personally, even when I get near a patient, I can feel it. But to put that in a logical explanations, I accept I fail to express it in words.
We appreciate that, and I think that's where we respect the spiritual roles of traditional and then the religious leaders. And we have another request to Dr. Sekaja. Tell us about the different roles of the different tools that you have shown in one of your slides. I think it was the third last slide.
We are connected in various ways. We are connected to minerals like copper. We are connected to symbolism like shapes. We are connected, and also plants, animals, we are connected to different ways. But now, for example, if you have a small spear made of copper, we can relate it to a deity called Chiwanuka. And once you have that small spear made from copper, or a metallic shape made from copper, and you have it near you, and naturally you have the Chiwanuka powers, the powers of deity Chiwanuka, you settle, you get at peace. When, for example, I get patients and they are related to deity Chiwanuka, and I appreciate that, I get a copper ring, be it a copper chain or anything, bring it close to them, they will immediately have a relief. So we have spears made up of metals that are black or painted black. We have those like that are bronze-like. So all those metals, depending on the shape, and the shape might relate directly to a specific deity or a specific spirit that we think can have a hand in helping you to achieve a stable health status.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yahaya. And then Lawrence, how would you speak to that? The use of these symbols or the tools, the spiritual tools.
How do I do what? If I beg your pardon?
Tell us very briefly about how you can use the different spiritual tools, maybe the medals, the rosary. How do you use them in spiritual healing?
Yes, when we talk about spirituality, we are talking about different spiritual beliefs and activities that are involved within the domain of religion, of a particular faith, or of a particular believer. What I can say that I actually, in my slides, I had prepared a statement which says that every religion is a right religion as long as that religion is not against the virtue of love. And this connectedly points to the question Sarah in the chat room questioned. I think it is all about the spiritual needs of every human person is centered around relationships that can make someone feel, as Dr. Sekaja has said, that he can't express how the patients, when they go through the forest, how they get healed. He can't explicitly state that because of ABCD or because I've touched on them, that they have managed to get healed. No. So, and the same with this. In most cases, it is the virtue or it is the point of a patient. At times, there are problems which go psychological, and they just need a lovely relationship, someone to exhibit love, to be there, to be present, and to stay connected to someone, that which gives meaning. I think the medals, the sacramentals, we call them sacramentals in the language of religion. Those are sacramentals. Those are symbols that are used to demonstrate faith, to nourish, to give guidance, and to show more support, or to lean on sign over a particular thing which is not seen. That's what I can respond on that.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Lawrence. Dr. Yahaya, you have a question here. What advice do you give a health professional whose practice is governed by a national medical body which follows Western principles of medicine, yet he or she feels that nature has a solution to health?
Thank you, moderator. That question actually relates to what I am, because I'm a medical doctor by training, and I follow the medical principles and the medical logic. But the experience I have is that whatever is logical is not necessarily true. And equally so, whatever is not, whatever does not make sense is not necessarily wrong. So we have the biomedical perspective has a logical flow that makes sense to the biological body. But that medical flow cannot make sense at all to the spiritual realm. So if you relate, you use the biological principles, medical principles that relate to the physical body, and you apply them as the yardstick to the spiritual realm, not only have you failed, but you have failed completely. You will never achieve anything. So since there are different ways of knowing, different ways of acquiring knowledge, we are gifted differently. Let us use our gifts the way they are gifted within their logic. Because as a biomedical doctor, when I went for training and somebody touched my head for 30 minutes and said training was over, that was not logical. But up to now, I actually experience that as much more informative than the training I had in medical school. So I believe, let us nurture our gifts. We are all gifted spiritually in different ways, but we have also acquired Western logical approach to issues. A combination of both is an excellent approach for the benefit of our patients. Don't get tied to only one perspective. You will lose. Instead, apply all that you have learned and you are gifted to use to assist the patients. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yahaya. And that attests to our multidisciplinary approach in palliative care. This question is to you, Lawrence. So if a patient declines interventions that would improve their quality of life, for example, someone says, I want to die and I do not need amputation. Should we call this part of spirituality?
No. According to my understanding, I think those Schumann thoughts and someone's wish or will according the way he or she experiencing or he's perceiving the way things are drawing to be. The reality is spirituality is all about that which makes meaning. No matter traditional, no matter the other westernized system of religion, which we term as true religions here. So it's all about which gives meaning. If the patient remains with autonomy, actually we take back the concept of autonomy. The patient remains with the powers either to deny amputation or to say yes to amputation. And it's your duty as a medical personnel, a health worker, is not to inflict that person that please, according the way I know, you have to receive this amputation for your healing. So it could be an acceptance of someone that the way I live, the way I see things, and the way I saw someone experiencing over the same, I would not wish to go through the same pain or the same experience. And that person decides not to do so. But I will not take it as that it is a spirituality. It's a decision, a physical decision, which is governed by the logical flow of thoughts and I can term it a decision that you can draw which govern your own life. I don't know
That
whether
is
I've
excellent. That is excellent, Lawrence.
Yeah.
A good ice between spirituality, philosophy, and ethics. Very well
Yeah.
answered. And you have another question on
Yes,
what it takes for a client to be admitted in the palliative care center and whether it is affordable. This is a question from Miss Anne Semwemba.
Okay, please. Yes, Anne Semwemba, to be admitted a patient in palliation, I think as will let us understand that palliation is a component of almost the holistic support. That is the spiritual part of it, the psychological, the social, and the physical, which is basically termed as health. A patient to be admitted in palliation, first and foremost must be a patient who is experiencing a standard of pain, some pain, or a cancer patient. That's what we normally say. A patient of suffering with cancer, diagnosed and well documented, that is the cancer patient. That is the first step. But not necessarily that only cancer patients should go for palliation, no. So there are problems which could call for other support, like the social support, the social healing, and the spiritual healing, which could be well handled in a palliative setting. I will speak to our setting here at Hospice Africa, Uganda. To us here, basically we handle cancer patients, but you will find that we have different illnesses like HIV, we have different illnesses like sickle cell patients, we have different diagnoses that we are taking care of here. But all of them, they must be fit in those 4 dimensions. Is this patient suffering spiritually? Is this patient, the pain, is it physical? Can we take control of the physical pain by the use of our standard pain killers? Is this patient, is he or she suffering from the social perspective that might call for a palliative entry to support? So all those domains are the first principles. Are you a patient and fully diagnosed as a patient? That's where the beginning. Is it affordable? Yes, it is affordable. To us, Hospice Africa Uganda, the services are free of charge, despite the fact that this new normal of the funding of being down, that's we find that some of the, I can say the support is a bit hard, like the social support is there, but it's a bit like it needs a collective effort to you as, and actually I'm passing this over to you as we are paneling this discussion to think about those patients and the support they receive for us we give is coming from you. So we provide all that, but at a free cost as long as you are a registered patient of hospice. What else? I think that's all. Being a patient and the services are free. That is it. The rest of the program can understand when you visit here.
Thank you very much, Lawrence. We encourage people to visit Hospice Africa Uganda and to also support it. So we are getting to winding up. I have one question for Dr. Sekaja. Would somebody benefit from this spiritual healing if they took a walk in the forest, even if they don't believe that they would get the relief or the benefit that this walk offers?
Thank you very much for that. Most of the people I take through the forest walk, I don't first tell them what they are going to experience. I only say, no, let us have a simple walk around here. It's after the walk, as we are sharing that, they tell me their experiences. And that's how I also come to appreciate that the forest interaction has much more to offer than we could ever think about.
And lastly, do you have a cultural option for meditation?
A cultural approach for meditation?
Yeah, if one wants to meditate, relax their mind, detach, what option do you have culturally?
Now, that one assumes that one, I know what meditation is. But suppose I think I know, meditation, you try to live, you go to another level beyond where you go to another level. And for us, in a cultural approach, we call it a stance level. You go into stance, and that is easily achieved through Okusamira. When somebody gets possessed, he has left that level where the brain is thinking to another level where the brain can utter words without you thinking about them. You thinking about them. So we can easily reach that level through Okusamira. And Okusamira is our cultural approach to meditation, if I understand what meditation is all about.
Yes, that's perfect and an appropriate response. So thank you everyone for joining us for this Super Soul session. And we are profoundly grateful to our two speakers, Dr. Sekaja and Mr. Lawrence Matovu. And I encourage you to kindly visit Dr. Sekaja's Institute and enjoy the forest walks. So we'll be in touch soon with our next webinar series. Thank you very much for attending. And I wish you a wonderful evening or morning. Thank you. Yes, please.
Thank you.
There is a question in the chat room, which I think it goes to Dr. Sekaja for more elaboration.
Okay, but we are getting out of time. We are running out of time. So you have the question, Yahaya, is Okusamira real or faked?
Okusamira is much, much real to me than any other thing. It's much real, good, very beneficial, and actually it has a healing perspective.
Okay, thank you very much for the response. So I think we have to close down, and we have positive compliments from the people who have listened to the session. Thank you very much, our panelists. We are very grateful, and we thank you for sharing your knowledge.